The battlefield is shifting and not in Ukraine's favor. Russia has intensified its assault on Ukrainian cities, launching a wave of drone and missile strikes, just as U.S. President Donald Trump halts military aid to Kyiv. With strained air defenses and resources dwindling, Ukraine faces an increasingly dire situation.
Russia has sharpened its attack, unleashing a devastating combination of missiles, drones and glide bombs on high-value targets inside Ukraine. Russian troops are using heavy artillery fire on the front lines as Ukrainian cities reel from the latest onslaught. These are images from the front lines showing heavy Russian firepower. The strategic port of Odessa and northeastern city of Sumy bore the brunt of Russia's latest strikes. A Russian drone attack wounded several people and crippled energy facilities in Odessa, triggering widespread blackouts and disabling heating systems during frigid winter conditions. Russia has repeatedly denied striking non-military targets. Ukrainian officials claim that another Russian strike hit a medical polyclinic in Sumy, further devastating healthcare capacity. Russian forces are attempting to breach the Russia-Ukraine border in Sumy Oblast with the apparent aim of severing Ukrainian supply lines. The northeastern Sumy region borders Russia's Kursk region, where Ukrainian forces launched a bold incursion last summer to divert Moscow's troops from Donbass and thwart Russian plans for a northern offensive. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv, local authorities say that a Russian drone slammed into a residential building, igniting a fire and injuring several civilians. Images show emergency crews battling flames in the devastated structure as residents flee their homes. These attacks come as US President Donald Trump suspended military aid to Ukraine, sharply escalating pressure on Kyiv to agree to peace negotiations with Russia.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
The second blow for Zelensky comes just days after the Oval Office dressing down. Trump says he is seeking a rapid end to the war. But right now, Ukraine is in a precarious position. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Heino Klink, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, join us live on the broadcast from Washington, D.C. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. President Trump has suspended military aid and is pushing for a deal at the same time. What could happen next?
Well, what I'm hoping is that the Ukrainian government recalibrates its approach to the Trump administration. Obviously, last Friday's meeting in the Oval Office was a fiasco, particularly when you consider the meetings that occurred there just prior with the British Prime Minister and the French President that were highly successful. So it is unfortunate that we were all able to witness, live on TV, the diplomatic spat between the leaders of two countries. Those types of conversations should never happen in public, in front of cameras, and those types of disagreements should only be voiced behind closed doors, which is, again, very, very common practice as nations engage one another. Unfortunately, President Zelensky came to the White House with a deal on the table that would have further enhanced and strengthened the ties between the Ukraine and the United States. Instead, he walked away, and frankly, by antagonizing the new administration. And now the new administration is putting additional pressure on Ukraine by pausing military aid in order for them to, again, relook at their policies with respect to, hopefully, future peace negotiations.
From a defense perspective, with the U.S. pausing its supply of weapons, I understand even those that are in transit. How vulnerable is Ukraine now?
In the short term, it won't have an operational impact, but I would say beyond 30 days or so, it will start to sting, absolutely. Obviously, the Europeans have been talking for quite some time about, quote unquote, stepping up. And in the last 3 years, you have seen an increase in European aid, including military aid to Ukraine. But again, the fallout from the meeting, if you will, one silver lining of the fallout from the Oval Office meeting is that this has provided a shock to Europe itself, so that now difficult conversations are being had in European capitals and amongst European leaders to basically do more in order not just to help Ukraine, but to enhance deterrence across NATO, given the fact that they have a neighbor, the Russian Federation, that has shown a propensity towards aggression. Europe should have taken much more robust steps to invest in its own defense early on. Now we see, after 3 years of war on the European continent and an American presidency that is not looking for open-ended war, the Europeans are finally, I think, coming to the rightful conclusion they have to do more.
Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you've dealt with situations like this before. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, by his own admission, met with Volodymyr Zelensky prior to that Oval Office meeting and that showdown. And then he went on CNN making bizarre comments saying that the White House has become an arm of the Kremlin. So my question is, to what extent will events like this perhaps be a spoiler in trying to find some kind of negotiated settlement to the Russia-Ukraine war? And how do you see this kind of involvement affecting the talks?
Well, it's obvious that issues such as this will find political opportunists in all the democracies in which we live, and this will be used to criticize the Trump administration. That's unfortunately politics as usual in the United States. I would offer, again, let's look at history a little bit, and let's remember the first Trump administration. It was the first Trump administration that provided lethal aid to Ukraine. That was on the heels of the Obama administration, in essence, doing nothing after the Russian annexation of Crimea. It was the Trump administration that levied the most forceful sanctions against Putin and his regime. And it was the Trump administration that also, in essence, vetoed, if you will, the Nord Stream 2 deal in the Baltic, connecting Russia and Germany. It was the Biden administration that lifted that veto. So let's look beyond the rhetoric. Let's look at the actions that occurred during the various administrations. And let's be cautiously optimistic that Ukraine, again, will recalibrate its approach to the United States, that a mineral deal as a first step to strengthen relationships between Washington and Kyiv will be signed in the short run, and that we then start on the path towards a just ceasefire and hopefully a just prolonged period of peace on the European continent.
Well, we'll be learning a lot more as President Trump addresses a joint session of Congress tonight from Washington, D.C. We'll be watching very closely to see what he's going to talk about regarding Ukraine, regarding Russia, and moving forward in general. Mr. Secretary Heino Klink, thank you so much for joining us on WION.
Thank you.